Hi!
Hi!
Welcome back!
Welcome back to our channel.
I'm Kathy.
I'm Celeste.
And today Celeste is going to be telling us the story, and I have a feeling it's going to be really creepy and interesting, so buckle in and get ready.
This story I don't think you're prepared for. So it kind of ties our two topics together, paranormal and true crime.
I love that.
But I definitely think it falls more on the side of paranormal.
Oh.
And this is the story of the Dyatlov Pass Incident.
Oh.
Dyatlov Pass was actually named after Igor Dyatlov, and he was 23 years old. When he was a little boy, he loved to go camping, and he also loved to build radios when he was a little kid.
Oh, wow.
By the time he got to the Ural Polytechnic Institute, he was a full-on tinkerer. The institute itself was one of the best engineering schools in Russia.
Oh.
I think it still is. While he was there, he built a telescope. He would use it to go watch satellites and stars with his friends.
Wow. That's insane that he built his own telescope.
Yeah. And here's a picture of him.
Oh, how cute.
Yeah. And many Russian political prisoners had been freed around this time from Stalin's rule.
Oh.
So the economic growth of Russia was rapidly expanding, and it was a time of positivity and optimism in Russia. So yeah, Igor had led several wilderness trips, and he loved it. That was something that he was really good at and something that he did all the time.
Oh, wow.
He was really experienced because he had done it so many times. He had been involved in the outdoors since he was a little kid. He would take his inventions or outdoor equipment that he upgraded, and he would take it with him on these trips.
Oh, wow.
In late 1958, Igor started planning a winter expedition that would be a 16-day cross-country ski trip.
Wow.
In the Ural Mountains, and that's the north-south mountain range that divides Western Russia from Siberia and Europe from Asia.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So it's like a huge mountain range.
Oh, okay.
And he submitted his proposal to the Ural Polytechnic Institute Sports Club, and they approved it.
Oh.
So Igor started to recruit classmates and friends to join on this trip with him, and he recruited 8 people total, and they were all highly experienced winter campers and cross-country skiers. So it would be 9 people altogether. And one of the first people that he recruited was Zina Kolmogorova, who was rumored to be his romantic interest. Here's a picture of her.
Oh, wow. She's so pretty.
Yeah, she's so cute. And another was Igor's close friend, Georgy Krivonishenko, who had graduated from the university 2 years before.
Oh.
And he was known for his playful attitude, and he would sing songs and tell jokes, and he played the mandolin. So he was kind of just like a cute little goofball guy. Here's a picture of him.
Oh, cute. It's like every group needs that. Just somebody that's goofy and is just going to bring up the energy.
Yeah, bring up the vibe.
Yeah.
2 others were graduates as well. Rustam Slobodin and Nikolay Thibault-Brignol. Here's a picture of Rustam and Nikolay.
Oh, okay. And those 2 graduated already from the institute.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the other students included Yuri Yudin, Yuri Doroshenko, and Alexander Kolovatov. And here's pictures of them.
Oh, okay.
And then Lyuda Dubinina was the youngest of the group, just 20 years old.
Wow.
And on a previous wilderness trip, she actually got shot accidentally by a hunter, like in the woods. And then she took a 50-mile journey back to civilization.
When she was shot?
Yeah. And she would brag about it. Like, she was really proud of it, basically.
Yeah. Good for, yeah.
Yeah. So all of the hikers were really experienced. They had been in survival situations before. So this trip wasn't supposed to, be anything too outlandish or wild. A couple of days before the group was due to set off, the university administration added a new member, Semyon Zoloratov. He was a 37-year-old veteran of World War II. So he was way older than them.
Yeah.
It was said that they were kind of bothered by him being added to the group just because they didn't know him. The rest of them were friends.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of weird that he got added, but they were whatever. They were so nice to him and cordial to him or whatever.
Yeah.
So the route was 350 miles north of Sverdlovsk. It was in the territory of the Mansi people, who were an indigenous group of people that lived in the Urals. travels. Igor had developed a strong respect for the Mansi people, and he even wrote his own dictionary full of words from the Mansi language so that he could use it to communicate with them if he needed to.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Igor's group would ski 200 miles, and as far as anyone knew, no Russian had taken this route before, so it was completely unexplored besides by the Mansi people. So it was supposed to be this new, it's just going to be a simple trip that even though it was unexplored, they expected the terrain to be smooth, and they just expected it to be not easy but not extremely difficult either.
Especially because these are people that are experienced. They've been in survival situations before. It's not like just regular old people.
Yeah, exactly. They did expect below freezing temperatures, intense winds, and really deep snow, but like I said, they expected the terrain to be smooth, not like rough rocks or anything crazy like that.
Yeah.
So they left Sverdlovsk by train. They left Sverdlovsk by train on January 23rd, and they were just a bunch of young adults having fun. Like, this was just a cute, fun, winter expedition with their buddies. When they got on the train, a bunch of them hid under seats so that they could avoid buying tickets. And they also had, like, a communal diary where they would pass it around and everyone could write little journal entries. They had their own diaries, too, but they had a communal diary that they would write stuff in.
That's so cute.
Yeah, and when you read the diary entries, it's just a bunch of entries of people like our age having fun, talking about love and friendship and relationships,
Yeah.
So it was just cute.
That's so sweet.
Yeah. On a layover between trains, Georgie, the one that played the mandolin and was like a little goofball boy, he got detained by police because he was playing the mandolin and he was panhandling for extra change. And it just kind of gives you context on how he was, what type of person he was. Yeah. They also brought cameras where they would document their trip. You can look at the pictures and you can just see it's literally just pictures of them on a vacation, essentially.
Wow.
It's like pictures of them playing in the snow, smiling, laughing, just hugging, being cute.
That's so cute.
Yeah. They also brought a bunch of their equipment, as you would expect. Like I said, Igor was an inventor, and one of the inventions that he brought on this trip was a little camping stove that could be used as like a campfire or used to cook food. So he made that himself, and he was like, I'm just gonna bring this with.
Wow.
They also packed skis, shovels, an axe for chopping wood, flashlights, cold weather gear, sleeping bags, and a large tent that all 10 of them could fit in.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they rode trains for the next 2 days until they reached Ivdel, and then they traveled another day by bus, then in the back of a woodcutter's truck, and finally by ski guided by a horse-drawn sleigh.
Wow, that's quite the journey.
Yeah. They slept in an abandoned logging camp where Yuri Yudin, one of the hikers, he had a flare-up of sciatica. His back had been bothering him for the past few days, but he just thought that it would go away, or he was hoping that it would go away because he didn't want to miss out on the trip,
Yeah.
But it didn't, and so he decided that he should turn back. And that ended up being one of the best decisions, or maybe the best decision that he made in his life. The next day, January 28th, is when he decided to turn back. And the group was really sad about his departure. They obviously didn't want him to leave, but especially Lyuda, the youngest of the group.
Oh, the 20-year-old.
Yeah. She had gotten pretty close to him just in that short amount of time. It was suspected that they had a budding romantic relationship. However, Yuri did deny that, so it's not clear. Besides Yuri turning back, everything else was going according to plan. If you go through the journal entries, you can see that they just documented a lot about sitting around the campfire, talking, laughing, singing. Georgie would play the mandolin and all of them would sing songs together. It's really cute. Like, if you read it, it's just so relatable, I feel like,
Yeah, just a bunch of young adults just having a good time together in nature and just like enjoying each other's company.
Yeah, and it's like a time before cell phones and technology. The main source of entertainment is each other. And they were super close. It wasn't like the first time that they had gone out and done these types of excursions together. They were all pretty familiar with each other besides the older guy, Semyon. You know? By January 31st, they got to a wooded area in the valley and they decided to set up camp. And here's a photo of them just after they changed clothes and they were preparing to ascend up the mountain where the trek would get much more difficult. So here's a picture.
Oh, everybody's all bundled up.
Yeah. And in this photo, Igor is explaining to Semyon, the older guy,
Mm-hmm.
that they should make an outpost where they can come back to, and they can just leave some of their food and stuff there so that when they climb up the mountain, it'll be a little bit easier.
Oh, yeah.
And then when they come back, they can get the rest of their stuff. It would just lighten the load, essentially. On February 1st, they started to trek through the pass. So it seems that they plan to get over the pass and make camp there.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a huge storm, like a weather storm. I think it was like a blizzard, probably.
Mm-hmm.
And the storm got worse and worse. And so their vision was impaired because they couldn't see.
That's so scary, dude.
Yeah, and so they lost their direction and they deviated away from their original trek toward the top of Kholatskal. In Mansi, it translates to Dead Mountain, which is never a good sign. When they realized their mistake, the group decided to set up camp there on the slope of the mountain. Rather than move less than a mile downhill to a forested area that would provide more shelter, they decided to just stay there. The plan was to end up in the tiny village of Vishay around February 12th. And when the Ural Polytechnic Institute didn't receive the telegram from Igor or any of the other hikers, they were a little worried, but they weren't super concerned because telegrams can take a while. It's like those old machines where you would type in codes and it would be like...
Oh, yeah.
And they hadn't received it. They know it can take a while for us to get a message from them, so whatever.
They weren't super worried.
Yeah, and especially because all of them were experienced, so if something happened or whatever, they probably can handle it. In other words, they just weren't worried right away.
Yeah, it makes sense why they wouldn't be.
Yeah. Igor had told the sports club that they would reach Vishay any time between the 12th and the 15th. Friends and family and like the school knew that they were all experienced, so they probably knew what they were doing. That all changed on February 20th. 8 days had passed and they still hadn't heard from the hikers.
Yeah.
At that point, family and friends demand that a search party gets started so that they can go and see what's going on.
Yeah.
This is really cool. It was a big group of searchers. It was the students from the school, the Mansi hunters from the indigenous tribe, the police and military all got involved to try and find the hikers.
Oh, I love that.
And by February 26th, so 6 days after the search parties were initiated, so it's been over 2 weeks now that anybody has heard from the hikers, the students find the tent. And it's partially covered in snow and a little bit collapsed. And after digging it out, the search party saw that the tent was cut from the inside out. Yeah, like somebody took a knife to cut their way out. And it was cut in several places, but everything inside of the tent was intact. Everything. So like the camping equipment, including the axe, it was all arranged nicely by the door. There was food laid out as if it was just waiting to be eaten. There was a stack of wood for heating the stove, clothes, cameras, all the journals, and the shoes.
What?
Even their shoes. But no one was inside the tent or anywhere around the tent.
That makes no sense.
Yeah, exactly. Why would the hikers leave the tent, first of all, in freezing weather when there's a storm?
Yeah.
And especially, why would they leave the tent without their shoes?
Without
or their weather
shoes,
gear?
Yeah. And also, why would it be cut from the inside out?
Right.
What the heck?
It doesn't make any sense.
No.
And searchers continue looking through the area, and they find that about 100 feet down the mountain, there are footprints that are leading toward the tree line, where that like more covered area was.
Oh, yeah.
They aren't booted prints. They're just footprints without socks or just socks.
Ooh, that sounds so cold.
Yeah, one shoe or even barefoot.
Wow.
And what's even weirder is that the prints suggested that the hikers were walking in a single file line down the hill. So they weren't like scattered how you would just be walking casually. They were like all walking single file.
What?
Yeah. On top of that, according to experts, the footprints looked as though the hikers just walked. They didn't run or anything. They just walked slowly and in an orderly fashion.
What the hell?
There were about 9 sets of prints, and the searchers followed the tracks for 1,600 feet until the tracks completely vanished. The searchers were like, okay, well, they probably just kept walking. Maybe snow covered the rest of the prints or whatever. The next morning, on February 27th, after following the trail for about a mile away from the tent, they ended up finding the remains of a fire underneath a huge Siberian pine tree. Next to it, they found the first 2 of the 9 hikers. Georgy, the one that played the mandolin, and Yuri Doroshenko. Both of them were only partially dressed in their underwear. There was no cold weather gear anywhere near their bodies. No coats, hats, gloves, or boots. Georgie was a close friend of Igor's and had actually participated in several of the expeditions with Igor, so Georgie was experienced, you know? Again, like, these people are experienced.
Yeah.
This is where it's going to get kind of graphic, and normally I wouldn't include these types of details, but I think that it's just so bizarre that it needs to be included for you to understand the context of the story. Around their bodies were bits of bark that had been torn from the Siberian pine tree, and about 15 feet up the tree, there was bits of clothing and chunks of flesh. It seemed like maybe that was from somebody climbing the tree, potentially. That was like the best guess of the searchers. Like, they just had no clue.
Yeah.
And it could be that if somebody did climb the tree, maybe they were trying to escape something, or maybe they were trying to see where the other hikers were. If it was Georgie or Yuri D, like, maybe they were trying to find a way back to the tent.
These people are experienced hikers, or experienced in the wilderness. I don't know. I have so many questions. My mind is just like trying to wrap itself around this story right now.
I know, and it gets even worse.
Oh my god.
Yeah. Georgie's body was found laying face down. His body was completely frozen, and he was covered in bruises, and a chunk of flesh was missing from the back of his hand. He had burns all up and down his legs. A chunk of his own flesh was found in his mouth. I feel like there's really no way to know for sure, because I personally can't picture myself, even if I was freezing, biting a chunk of flesh out of my hand.
Yeah.
But it's been suspected that maybe he was trying to hold back tears, or maybe he was trying to keep his nervous system alert by biting his own skin off. I don't really know. But according to the medical examiner, his official cause of death was hypothermia and fatigue. Yuri D's body was found right next to Georgie's, like I said. His body was also completely frozen, except there was a gray foam around his mouth, like gray liquid, which can be from extreme pressure to the chest or an extreme chest injury. It can cause like weird liquid to form. So it could be from chest trauma. It could also be from heightened elevation or from heart failure, but it's like none of that really makes sense if he froze to death, you know?
Yeah.
It's possible that he either fell from the tree or someone or something was putting weight on his chest with extreme force. He also had burn marks on his head and on his foot. He was covered as well in bruises and scrapes. He had blood on his nose, mouth, and on his ear, and his upper lip was severely swollen with a dark red hemorrhage. Yuri D's cause of death was also ruled as hypothermia. It was found that both of their bodies had been moved after they died. It's speculated that maybe the other hikers had moved them in a respectful fashion after they realized that they had passed.
Yeah.
Or maybe they took the clothes off of them if they were freezing to death themselves. Maybe they needed the clothing. Maybe it was like a survival technique. Or maybe not. But there's really no way to know. And I think that is... Just keep that in mind. Later that day, a search party found the bodies of Igor and Zina. Both of them were facing the direction of the tent, and their fists were closed up into fists. It seemed like maybe they were trying to get back to the tent. Igor was found about 1,000 feet away from the pine tree. He was on his back with his arms curled up towards his chest. Unlike Yuri D and Georgie, he was almost fully clothed, except his coat was not buttoned up, which is kind of strange. If he was freezing to death, why wouldn't he do the simple task of just buttoning up his coat, right?
Yeah.
It was obvious to examiners that his body was also manipulated after death, but considering that no clothing was missing, it's a bit more strange, you know? And it was later discovered that the shirt that Igor was wearing belonged to Yuri D, and it's possible that the shirt was removed from Yuri's body so that he could fight the extreme cold, like I said.
That would make sense.
It was concluded that Igor had died from hypothermia again, but he also had scrapes and bruises all over. He had abrasions on both of his eyelids.
Abrasions are like cuts?
Yeah, like deep cuts on his eyelids and all over his face and his ankles. He had abrasions on his knuckles that were synonymous with a fist fight. So it was suspected that maybe he got in a fight. And they also found that his brain was swollen, which is a common thing that happens when you're suffering from hypothermia.
Oh, okay.
And your body will start to go into like having convulsions right before you pass away.
Oh, wow.
So they think that maybe that's what happened.
That's horrible.
Yeah. And Xena had been on 6 major trips before this one. And on one of the trips that she went on, she got bit by a viper, a venomous snake.
Oh, wow.
And she survived.
Wow.
So with her experience and with her survival strengths, what went wrong this time?
Yeah.
She made it 2,000 feet closer to the tent, so quite a bit further than Igor. She had several pieces of cold weather gear as well. She had a sweater on, but it was missing the arm. Nobody knows if she like cut the sweater arm off herself or what. There was no sign of sexual assault on any of the hikers.
Oh, good.
She was found on her right side and kind of in the same position as Igor. She had the same type of brain swelling as Igor, and she had bruising and cuts all over her face and cuts on her hands, and a chunk of flesh was missing from her hand as well. And
just like Georgie.
yeah, she had a large bruise on the side of her body that would be the same as like if you got hit by a blunt force object.
Oh.
It was the same type of wound.
Ooh.
The official cause of death again was hypothermia. The next hiker found was Rustem Slobodin, and apart from Georgie, who was the only other person who brought a musical instrument, he brought a violin, so he would play music and sing as well. He was known as being one of the most positive and one of the most physically strong people in the group. He was found a few hundred feet from Igor, and when examiners looked over his body, they found that he had a fracture in his skull in the front, like, and on the sides. It would also be synonymous with a hit from a blunt force object. He was bleeding from his temples. He had hemorrhaging on both sides of his temples. No boofing, okay?
What's boof?
No
Oh,
more.
you go. Oh, look at them. Tired.
And medical experts concluded that he likely survived the injury for up to an hour after it happened.
Oh my god.
It's theorized that he became disoriented after suffering the injuries and then died from hypothermia. Unlike some of his friends, he was found in ice, which meant that his body was warm enough to melt the snow underneath him, and then it froze again. So he was likely alive for a bit longer than his friends. It's suspected that he also died from hypothermia, and similar to some of the others, it was likely that his body too was moved after he died. This is a quote from Dyatlov that I found really interesting. Death of Rustem Slobodin is judged as a result from hypothermia. All bruises and scratches were blamed on last-minute agony, although it is still somewhat unclear how he managed to harm his exterior hands and legs. When a person falls, even in an irrational state, it is usually the palms that suffer the most, as well as some aspects of the legs. Injury to the head are less common, especially bilateral ones, and it's also unusual to harm the face and the sides of the skull, while the back of the head has no damage. In case of Slobodin's body, we see the opposite. His injury pattern is a reverse of what we would usually see, an injury suffered by a freezing man in the last minutes of his life. It's been said that Rustem fell repeatedly on his face as he was walking down the mountain, and every time he fell, he managed to hit the sides of his head. This is unusual for a man who was probably in better physical shape than anyone else in the group, and even on a long ski trip could hardly be responsible for this alleged clumsiness.
Yeah, especially because didn't you say he was one of the more fit people of the group?
Yeah, how would the strongest person in the group fall on his face multiple times without receiving intense physical trauma to his hands, arms, or legs?
Yeah.
And on top of that, fall on his head multiple times without damaging the back of his head at all. Like
the
it
way
just-
you normally would when you fall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, they're walking in snow. It's not like they're walking on rocks.
Yeah.
The snow was suspected to be around, I think, 2 feet deep or something like that.
Oh, wow. So that would have been like a soft fall.
Right.
This makes no sense.
I know. 2 months go by without a trace of the remaining 4 hikers. In May, the snow started to melt. A Muncie man was walking with his dog one day just through the Urals. He saw like little sticks sticking up from the snow. He started to follow it because it kind of made like a little trail. When he followed it, he found a pair of ski pants. He picked it up. One of the legs had been cut with a knife. The knife was never found, by the way, just a side note. He notified the searchers and the police, obviously. They did an avalanche probe. It's like this long stick that you can use to see if people or objects are inside of an avalanche, basically.
Oh.
They were able to retrieve a piece of flesh, and so they decided to excavate. They found a little den that had been built by the 4 remaining hikers. This showed an effort of survival, however, it didn't save them from their horrifying fate, and it's still unclear as to why their survival attempts didn't work. Their
Especially-
experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they find the 4 remaining hikers right after this. And despite the shocking injuries of the first 5 hikers, the last 4 are in even worse condition. This part is very important, just so you guys know. There was more than 10 feet of snow that the hikers were buried in, okay?
Wow.
Just keep that in mind. And the injuries sustained were similar to the ones that you would get in a car crash. The first body recovered was Lyuda, the youngest girl. She was found with her body draped over a ledge with running water flowing near her body. Her lips were missing, exposing her teeth. The soft tissue around her face was missing and like on her cheek, so her jawbone was exposed. 10 of her ribs were broken and she had a massive heart hemorrhage. Both of her eyes were missing. Her nose was broken and flattened against her face. Her tongue was missing from all the way back here. She had blood in her stomach, which suggests that she was alive during the traumatic impact that caused her to have all those broken ribs and stuff. And her official cause of death, unlike the others, was ruled massive hemorrhage in the heart's right atrium. Semyon, the older guy that the hikers were unfamiliar with, he was found next. And he also had missing eyes, and the flesh of one of his brow bones was gone. He had 5 broken ribs, so similar to Lyuda, and he had a deep gash in the back of his head. And unlike the other 8 hikers, Semyon was fully clothed, and he even had shoes on.
Oh, wow.
He was also in the base of the den, which was suspected to be the warmest part of the little shelter that they built. He was the only one in there. His death was quickly ruled as hypothermia as well. Both Semyon and Lyuda suffered similar rib injuries, and it was suspected that they were both alive during the time that they suffered those traumatic impact injuries.
That sucks.
Like I said, the injuries were similar to ones you would get in a car accident. However, the injuries were internal and there was no external damage to the outside of their bodies. For example, with Lyuda, 10 of her ribs were broken, but there was no bruising. There were no scratches on the outside of her torso.
What?
Nothing. Just like her ribs were just broken.
That makes no sense.
I know. This is a fact that experts are still really confused about. If you were in a car accident and you got hit really hard by a car, then you would have external damage. You know?
That's what I don't understand. How can you get damage to your insides without having damage to your outsides?
Exactly. So this is a side note, but a camera was found on Semyon's body. According to hearsay, Yuri Y, the one that left because he had sciatica, he said that he was shocked that Semyon had a camera on his body because 4 of the cameras were found in the tent, and Yuri said that those were the only cameras that he was aware of.
Oh.
So Semyon had a 5th camera, and if he did, why did nobody know that he had a 2nd camera, supposedly? Yeah. And it was also strange that he would have taken the camera out of everything in the tent to begin with. Why did he have a camera on him? For what? And unfortunately, the camera had suffered water damage, so they couldn't retrieve any of the pictures.
That was about to be my next question.
Yeah.
Frick.
I know. Alexander was the next to be found. Again, just the strangest injuries. The skin on both of his eyebrows was missing, exposing his skull. He had a deep cut behind his ear. His neck was deformed. His nose was broken. And then again, the official cause of death was hypothermia. And the autopsy reports for the hikers were really vague and they didn't explain the injuries very much at all. Alexander's autopsy report was no different.
Why were they so vague? Why couldn't they at least go into detail? If I understand if you can't explain what caused the injuries, but why wouldn't you just go into detail and state everything that happened to them, you know?
And it gets even more frustrating.
Just wait. I'm about to pull my hair out.
Yeah. Nikolai was the last to be found, this guy. He had extreme fractures on the side of his skull, which again had to have been caused by an extreme impact of some kind. And similar to Lyuda and Semyon's internal injuries, Nikolai didn't have any external injuries like on the outside of his head, but his head was fractured. And he also had a hemorrhage in his right arm and a bruise on his upper lip. A homicide investigation began shortly after the 5 bodies were found, but was abruptly closed on May 28th because the investigator concluded that no crime had been committed. In the report, he said that the cause of death was because of an overwhelming force, which the hikers were not able to overcome, which is hardly an explanation. Not even a month after the last 4 bodies were found, the case was closed. And it was only a few months after the first bodies were found. So it's like the shortest investigation ever.
That's such bull.
I know.
Ooh, that's so frustrating. An overwhelming force?
Yeah. as you can imagine, this left the families angered and dissatisfied because they're not getting any kind of answers.
Yeah.
You know? What happened after that was the Russian Soviet government. They closed the case, obviously, and then they basically covered it up for 3 years after that. They taped off the area where the bodies were found. They made it so that nobody could go in there. They closed it up so that the case files weren't accessible. People didn't have access to the information. The medical examiner explained in the report that the soft tissue, like the tongue, the eyes, and the soft tissue on the face could have just gone away over time due to decomposition, and because Lyuda was near a stream bed. I don't think that that's impossible, but that only explains Lyuda. It doesn't explain why other hikers had chunks of flesh missing, you know?
Yeah. And also, that's true that if a body is in water, like after a while it starts to disintegrate, but her body wasn't found in the water. And I feel like it would still take a long time for that to actually happen.
Yeah. And remember I said, pay attention to this fact, the fact that they were buried in 10 feet of snow.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that preserve their bodies?
Yeah.
And then the other thing that they suspected is maybe their, like, the eyes and the tongue and, you know, like the other hikers' flesh and stuff had been eaten by small animals that lived in the mountains. But I'm just like, what animal lives in 10 feet of snow and goes and eats, like, eyes? Like, I just don't...
Yeah, like just the eyes.
Yeah, and chunks of flesh. Like, I just don't... It just doesn't seem very likely to me. But, again, it's just speculation.
It doesn't seem likely to me either.
Like I said, the families were extremely unhappy, and the general public was really confused because this just doesn't explain what happened, and it's not enough of an answer for anyone.
No.
Why did they leave the tent the way that they did? Why were they cutting holes from the inside out? Why didn't they leave with any of their equipment? Even if they were in a hurry, why didn't they just put their shoes on at least? Why did they go single file down the hill? Why did they split up? Why didn't they just stick together? What are their injuries from?
Yeah.
These injuries are so inexplicable. It just doesn't make sense.
Literally none of them.
Oh, all of them had been burned, scratched, bruised, beat up, essentially. It just doesn't make sense that they all died from hypothermia, but they also all suffered extreme external damage, you know, and internal.
With no proof on the outside.
Yeah, and it's like, even if you just look at the external wounds that the hikers endured, like, that in itself doesn't make any sense at all.
No, not at all.
Lyuda's tongue was never found. Lyuda's eyes were never found. None of the other chunks of flesh were found. Like I said, the knife was never found. Other items that belonged to them weren't found. So it's just like, there are just so many questions that have never been explained. Something else that couldn't be explained in this case was the fact that the clothing that was recovered from several of the hikers had high levels of radiation. Radiation was not a naturally occurring substance in the area, but it was found on several of their clothing, and it was found in little spots throughout the area, but not outside of the area at all.
What?
Yeah.
That makes no sense.
I know. How do you say that?
Radiological.
How do you say it? A radiological expert testified that because the water was near them for so long, it started to wear off. So that means the high levels that were found were much higher before.
Jesus.
The story obviously is a complete mystery.
Yeah.
Nobody has ever really gotten a straight answer. So as you can imagine, tons of theories have come out about this story. I'll tell you some of the more popular ones, but if you want to know all of them, I would suggest going to Dyatlov because they have all of the theories on there.
Wow.
So, and there's a ton, like there's dozens.
Wow.
So the first theory I want to talk about is the Yeti theory. With the tent being cut open, it seems like maybe the hikers were trying to flee. If they were trying to flee, could it be that they were scared out of the tent by something? Could it be that they heard something that didn't sound human, and so they were like, what the heck is that? And they got scared. Maybe it was super close. It is also possible that maybe some of the hikers, if it was a big Yeti or something, if the Yeti stepped on the tent, then maybe they were trying to escape, and some of the hikers experienced the internal injuries well before they got down the mountain, like Lyuda and Semyon. And injuries that resemble the ones that you would get in a car accident with no external injuries. Could it be that this monster of some kind like grabbed them with its fist and just like, you know? Here's an image that was captured during the excursion. On one hand, it could be seen as just a hiker, but this is a verified photo that was found in the Dyatlov Pass photo stack. If you zoom in, the image, it just looks so weird.
Yeah.
It almost looks like Sasquatch, and it's been talked about time and time again, and this photo has never been tampered with or anything. It's just been released to the public. A lot of people think that it's just one of the hikers in the full coat, but I don't know.
I don't know. The face looks super dark to me. Like the whole, you know. Wow,
weird.
that's so creepy.
Yeah, and this could also explain the chunks of flesh on the Siberian pine tree. What if this big, monstrous creature threw one of the hikers at the tree? If you get thrown hard enough at a tree, I'm sure like branches would come off and you would suffer external and internal injuries of some kind, or maybe your head fractured or something, you know? Which 2 of the hikers had skull fractures.
Yeah, true.
You know?
Yeah.
I think that it's important to look at everything when you're looking at theories, and like, I don't know if this theory is very plausible, because if the hikers' footprints were visible in the snow, why wasn't the Yetis, you know, if it was a Yeti?
That's a great point, because you said that they only found like 9 sets of footprints total.
Yeah, exactly. The second theory is aliens. So there's a really strange photo that was one of the last photos that was taken on the excursion, and it's this one.
Ooh.
There's really no way to say like what the photo is of. It honestly kind of looks like an orb of some kind. It could be a picture of the night sky, or it could be nothing at all.
Yeah, it could just be like a, you know.
Yeah, blurry image.
Yeah.
But it's spooky, and there's an element of mystery behind this picture.
Yeah.
Even if it's not a UFO, like, why was the picture taken?
Yeah.
Especially back in the day, I feel like when you would use film, you had to kind of like save it, you know?
Yeah, you had to be intentional with what you wanted to take a picture of, because it wasn't just like an iPhone where you just like boop, boop, boop.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. And there's a whole controversy behind this image. A lot of people think that it is a UFO, and Igor's group wasn't the only group of skiers that was on an excursion during that time. There was actually a couple of other groups that were in similar areas. So it was like Igor's group and then a couple of other groups, but they were spaced out. And the same, like on the night of February 1st, where they like started their excursion up the trek, there was a group of hikers not too far away, and they said that they saw a glowing orb in the sky. Yeah.
Oh my god.
That night. It was like an orange ball of fire is how they explained it. They weren't the only ones to see something glowing in the sky that night.
Really?
The Monstrum people also claimed that they had seen what resembled a modern-day UFO in the sky that night. And if it was a UFO, this could explain the random radiation. Not that, like, aliens have radiation on them or whatever, but it's just but it's just so odd and specific that maybe it was the UFO. Who knows?
Yeah.
Could it be possible that if it was a UFO, the aliens caused the group to go into some kind of panic? I don't really know.
That would actually make sense. There's a couple things, like number one, the fiery orb that you mentioned, and the Betty and Barney video, which if you haven't seen it, go watch it. But that's what Betty reported too during one of her hypnosis sessions, seeing a bright fiery orb. That's been associated with aliens before, so there's that. And then also the radiation thing that you mentioned, and then how with the injuries, like the ribs that just were broken but there was no external damage on the bodies. There's no explanation for that. So aliens, you know, you want to be sensitive when it comes to these theories, because we're not trying to minimize what happened or anything like that. Just pure speculation thinking about it.
Yeah.
Wow.
I know you would find that theory interesting.
Yeah.
Russian military claimed that rockets had landed in the North Ural Mountains that night, but several geologists were not too far away from the mountains, and they saw something glowing and pulsating in orbits flying around in the sky and in the direction of Dead Mountain on the day of the tragedy, which would be the evening of February 1st. Like I said, the Muncie people saw it too, so it was like the students, the geologists, and the Muncie people all saw something orange glowing in the sky that night. The lead investigator of the case actually said that the tops of the trees were burnt. I guess that he came out with that fact way after the investigation had already closed.
Of course.
But I think maybe he was told to hide it or something like that.
Oh.
The third theory is paradoxal undressing, which is what happens when your body is going through hypothermia. You start to believe that you're warm, and so you'll take your clothes off. However, this doesn't really hold up with the Dyatlov Pass incident because a lot of the bodies were already dead before they were undressed. Does that make sense? So you would undress before you die, basically, you know?
Yeah, and also all of these people were professionals. They were all trained in survival situations. So I feel like that's something they would know. If you're experiencing hypothermia, you feel like you're hot. But I feel like they'd be the type of people that would be like, no, that doesn't make sense. They would talk themselves out of it.
Yeah.
And the fact that they were dead before, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
so that theory doesn't really hold up.
yeah.
And then the fourth theory is that maybe a fight broke out, which I think that this is possible. The only thing that doesn't really line up with this theory is the internal injuries, because I don't know how somebody would inflict that type of damage to someone internally. Like, it just doesn't really make sense. But you know how Semyon was like just this random guy that was added. So it kind of makes you wonder if maybe he was trying to take control or maybe be the leader of the group, and Igor was like, nah man, you're not even our friend, you know? I don't know. And the fact that Igor had bruising and abrasions on his knuckles, synonymous to a fight, it just kind of makes you wonder if maybe a fight broke out and that's why, you know.
Which I can see that, but at the same time, it would be like 8 against 1 if a fight did break out. Because all of these people were good friends. So I don't see why they would fight each other.
Exactly. That theory also
Doesn't hold up, yeah.
The fifth theory is a problematic theory, but a lot of people at the beginning of this case, when the theories first started popping up, a lot of people thought that maybe the Monsi people were involved.
I knew they would try to pull some crap like that.
Yeah, and so I didn't even really put any context to that theory because if you look at the research, it really was kind of just a prejudice cop-out that people used to find some kind of answer to what happened. And so I don't think it really holds up. Yeah. But the Monsi, they did hang hallucinogenic mushrooms from trees in the Ural Mountains. And it's suspected that maybe the hikers took some mushrooms and they all started tripping and then like got crazy.
That was going to be one of my next questions too, how they were trying to escape from inside the tent. That sounds like they could all be having a bad trip.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that is not too far-fetched. However, the mushrooms were toxic. The Monsi people wouldn't eat them just like that. They would feed them to reindeer and then the reindeer would digest them and then the Monsi people would drink the urine to like feel it. I just think if the hikers took it because it was toxic, then maybe they would see like throw up, other stuff.
That's true, yeah.
You know, around. I mean, there's really no way to know. It's possible.
It's possible, but I feel like also not, because Igor, how he had a lot of respect for the Monsi people, he probably knew basic facts about the way that they lived.
Yeah.
So he probably knew that they would hang the toxic mushrooms. But even if he didn't, I feel like, again, these people were professionals, so I don't feel like they would just willy-nilly like, oh, we're in the middle of the forest, let's do mushrooms that we just felt. Like, I just feel like they would be smarter than that, you know?
Yeah, and also I was thinking about that and I was like, what are the chances that all 9 of them did it?
Yeah, that they will all be down and do these, like, mystery mushrooms.
Yeah, so that doesn't really hold up, but it's interesting to speculate on.
Yeah, it is.
The sixth theory is a Soviet interaction of some kind. The Soviet government covered up this case, like I said, for 3 years after, and they taped off the area. The Soviet officials took a strong interest in the case. Like, during the time that they were doing the investigation and stuff, the Soviet officials were, like, monitoring everything. Like, they were there just, like, watching everything throughout the entire investigation. I don't think that's too uncommon, though, just because it's, like, if they were doing the investigation as well, maybe they were just trying to see what's going on. Yeah. And also, if they did have something to do with it, why wouldn't they hide the bodies or burn the bodies or get rid of the bodies?
That's
you know,
true.
Like, why would they just leave them there for anyone to find? You know,
yeah.
Especially 9 people. It's like somebody's gonna say something and be like, "Hey, my family member is missing" or whatever.
Yeah.
It is possible, however, that the Soviet military had suspected UFO activity, and maybe that's why they taped off the area, and maybe that's why they were so interested and came to check it out.
That That makes sense to me.
Yeah, and it would also explain why the case was shut so quickly.
Yeah.
Another probable theory is that the Russian Soviet government was trying to cover up the case because this was during the Cold War, and the Soviet government would use desolate areas to test nuclear weapons. They were trying to develop new, more powerful weapons. So they would go out to areas like the Ural Mountains in super desolate regions where there weren't roads or anything like that.
Wow.
And they would test out the weapons. So this could have been a testing ground for these weapons, including bombs. So it's possible that that's what could have executed the hikers, you know?
Wow.
And also, it's possible that because it was a testing area, maybe the Soviet officials like saw them and they were like, you're not allowed to be here, and then beat them. I don't know. But again, some of the injuries don't really line up with that. So the final theory of this whole case is the avalanche. So this theory, it's been debunked time and time and time again, but it's always been brought back up. The injuries sustained didn't match typical avalanche injuries. Usually people that die from avalanches will die from asphyxiation. From my research, people who die from avalanche trauma, like impact trauma, usually it's just a really small percentage of people. It's like, I think it's less than 10% of people. The majority of people who die in avalanches die from asphyxiation. They suffocate because they can't get enough oxygen.
Oh, okay.
So ultimately, when I was doing my research, I was like, well, that kind of makes sense. Like if they were squished by a bunch of snow, it would make sense why like some of their ribs were crushed or whatever.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't hold up to me as far as getting smacked around, because like I said, most people die from asphyxiation when they get hit by an avalanche.
Yeah, and also an avalanche wouldn't explain a lot of the injuries, like the chunks of flesh missing.
Yeah, the bruises, the scrapes.
Yeah, the missing tongue.
Yeah. Even if that happens, you still have a 50% chance of surviving.
Wow.
It's just such a small number of people who actually die from that. And it's like 9 people died from the avalanche, supposedly.
I can see why that theory doesn't hold up.
Yeah, and on July 11th of 2020, Andrei Kryakov, deputy head of Urals Federal District Directorate of the Prosecutor General's Office, announced an avalanche to be the official cause of death for the Dyatlov group in 1959, and the case was officially closed. So it was an avalanche, no questions asked. They basically had like these researchers go and prove that it was an avalanche that caused the hikers to flee the tent. That does hold up. Like scientifically, if you look at it, it makes sense that if a small avalanche occurred and started to go on the tent, it would make sense why the hikers would leave the tent.
Yeah.
But the researchers never explained anything that happened afterwards, and it wasn't because they didn't want to, it was because they couldn't.
Yeah.
So it explains why the hikers left the tent, but it doesn't explain why they suffered from all of those other injuries.
Yeah. And also I feel like that makes sense to me, but I feel like if you were fleeing the tent because of an avalanche, wouldn't you at least grab your shoes and jacket to make sure you wouldn't die?
Yeah.
Like as you're exiting, you know? Like quickly?
Especially if you're a professional.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing that I just always come back to is like they were experienced hikers. They know how to do this, you know?
Yeah.
It's not something new. Like they know how to do these things. Why wouldn't they try to ensure their survival by just grabbing things they need to survive?
Yeah, that's my thing.
Yeah. So yeah, that is the story of the Dyatlov Pass incident. I'm not done with my makeup, so I'm gonna finish it and then we'll come back and say goodbye.
Wow.
We're gonna fast forward now, DJ. Anyways, I hope that you guys liked this story. What did you think?
Honestly, this whole time, it's so frustrating. I thought it was a really interesting story. I don't know what my theory is. I do know what my theory is. I think aliens would make the most sense for me.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I really don't know. I think it's really frustrating because there's not an answer. My top 2 theories, either aliens or Russian nuclear weapons that went off.
Mm-hmm.
Let us know what you think happened.
Yeah. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you liked it.
Thank you so much.
And
you have a good day.
We hope you have a good day and stay tuned for our next video. Goodbye.